So thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here today, ladies and gentlemen. And if you've enjoyed the summit so far, then go to the website wbecs.com/refer and refer your colleagues so they can benefit and enjoy this summit too. Our presenter today is Myles Downey, and I will tell you more about him in just a moment. So you can also pose your questions, and we'll be answering questions at several points throughout the webinar and mostly at the end. So today's session is Coaching in the 21st Century, a required reinvention. The rules that define the 20th century business are working less and less effectively in a world of work that is defined by speed and complexity. New approaches to leadership and management are required for success in the 21st century. Creativity, innovation, talent, and retention are no longer just the human resources concerns. They are the concerns of each and every leader and manager. In this world of work, coaches can play a key and possibly a very vital role, but it cannot be done if it is operating from the old model, the old 20th century model of coaching. So this is a challenge for the profession and for each individual coach who wants to thrive. Now for today, remember to get the most out of this session by listening for actions that you want to take as a result of being here today, and take 3 actions within 24 hours. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our presenter today, Myles Downey. And Myles is a thought leader and entrepreneur in the world of performance, learning, and coaching. He is an author of Effective Coaching, and that book has sold in excess of 30,000 copies, and it's considered a seminal text on coaching. He's also the co-creator of the eCoach system, the world's first automated coaching system where there's actually no coach. And he is also the founder of the School of Coaching in the UK, established way back in 1996, and it's the first proper school of coaching. And he was also part of the team that established the Alexander Corporation in 1987, which was acknowledged by the Economist Intelligence Unit as the leading provider of executive coaching in Europe in both 1993 and 1995. So welcome, Myles, and now I will hand it over to you.
Thank you, Cherie, and welcome to everybody. Thank you for coming along. I'm looking forward to this, and I hope we have a good session. There are some things worth saying before I get into the meat of the topic. One, in the pre-summit, I covered some of this material, but in a more superficial manner. So if you were there at the pre-summit, you may recognize 1 or 2 things from that. But we go into greater depth here. The other thing to say is that my exposure and experience in coaching has been in the world of business, so I'm not particularly a life coach, and that influences how I think about the world of coaching, and you'll see that very much in the presentation. And then I got some feedback after the summit from a friend of mine who pointed out that one of my characteristics as a speaker and a presenter is that I pause while I wait for the most appropriate word to come to me, and that's fine on a stage where people can see me because they can see that I haven't gone away, but that on a webinar it can be a bit disconcerting. So one, I hope I don't pause too much, but I'm still here is the message in short. So that said, let me tell you a little bit more about what I'm planning to cover. Here we go, presentation outline. So I'll start with why I've said a required reinvention, and that will indeed cover a little bit of, begin to talk about what's happening in the 21st century, in the world of work in the 21st century. So there's a contention here that some things have changed between the 20th and 21st century, and the population in general hasn't necessarily caught up with that, and nor has the world of coaching. So I'll go through some observations about that. And that will take us into, so what are the demands that that places on leaders and managers in our businesses, our organizations today. And then, of course, that follows them. So for us as coaches, where's the opportunity? How can we help in that uniquely different world? And I think there are some particular reasons why coaching is appropriate to the 21st century in a way that even more so perhaps than in the previous century. There was in the UK in particular, in the early 90s to the kind of early to mid, arguably late 90s, there was a vast interest in organizations, in their managers being trained to coach. And in the 2000s, that kind of faded. And what's interesting is it's coming back as people interested in the talent agenda and in the engagement agenda are beginning to see coaching in a different light. So there are things positively changing. And that takes us to, so given that opportunity, what does that mean for the work that one might do with leaders and managers as a coach? And in my view of that, we've got to go back and understand what's core to coaching. As a coach and a trainer of coaches and indeed training managers to coach, I've got a fairly strong point of view about what effective coaching is, and I don't see much of that in the world, and I'll say more about that. And then these words, enabling genius. Enabling genius is deliberately a provocative title because genius for most people is the preserve of the very few. And what this is trying to say is actually that genius is available to, if not all of us, to many of us. And that leads us to the last part of my story, which is about reinventing yourself as a coach. So there's a story here, and I'll try and keep that story in front of us as we progress. If you were in front of me, I'd love to say at this point, what do you think about that? But I'll take it you're still with me, and I'll keep going. So why a required reinvention? The other thing to say, I think, is that my experience is in mature markets. So the UK and Europe are my principal playgrounds, and a lot. I'm speaking from my experience there. But if you bump into senior people who would be ideal candidates for coaching, the story that I'm getting directly from those people, but also from numerous colleagues, coaches' colleagues, is that increasingly those people are saying, yes, I did coaching 10 years ago and I'm not sure what value I got from it. So somebody listened to me and I felt good, but I wasn't sure what value was created for the business, or even sometimes for themselves. So that's part of what is, in a sense, a worrying story. And actually what you might hear in this is quite some worry and concern, but I'm hoping that the presentation in total will shine a light on a way forward. So that's my second point, is that, and it relates to the relevance issue, which is that coaching has been taken up to almost an exclusive degree by the learning and development departments of our large corporations, and it's been divorced from performance. So coaching is built around the leadership competencies or around a training program or whatever it is, or somebody who's got some behavioral difficulties or somebody who needs to step up as a leader. You very seldom hear of coaching that's about delivering a new product to the market or delivering, creating a new business, which is what I mean by performance. So I'm talking business performance there. This is interesting. Poor quality of most coaching. Clearly there are excellent coaches out there. And there's a sense here that it's almost like we've lost our way. That there was a LinkedIn group of where people comment on coaching. I think it was a ICF group, and somebody was talking about being effective, and pointed out that that the style of asking questions, what we might have called non-directive, was ineffectual. And one or two people came back up and said, yes, completely ineffectual. People need to be told what to do. And I was so shocked I didn't respond, because what's behind that is actually, from the way both those observers were making their comments, what was really clear was that nobody had trained them properly. And when the only tool you've got is a hammer, everything occurs as a nail. So they were using lots of hammers. Slightly shocking. And that's borne out too by talking with senior people who've had coaching. A colleague of mine is engaged in a research exercise at the moment, and the research is with people who are receiving coaching and what's helpful, and not just the lack of core skills, but actually people who are competent to understand business at a senior level seem to be in short supply. I'm slightly harsh with the next one, and I apologize for that, but I have a view that says the governing bodies aren't as strong as they need to be. And I know there are people with great intentions, good intentions, working very hard for not much return to try and make a difference in the world of coaching at the level of these governing bodies. But they've got an inherent problem, which is that if you want to promote an organization like that, a governing body, you have to have membership. And the more members you have, the greater the voice you have. The trouble is that inclusivity of that nature doesn't breed excellence. It kind of breeds the average. So we've been too inclusive, too consensual, and that's a problem, because it doesn't promulgate excellence in coaching, which is the only thing the coaching has got to market. On the corporate side, we have what I would term poor buying. That when I started coaching, the people I was speaking to were either the chief executive director or the HR director. And now when I go into an organization to speak about coaching, I'm speaking to somebody who's relatively junior, who probably hasn't been responsible for coaching for all that long, and who doesn't understand what life is like for a senior executive in the business. They probably don't actually fully understand coaching, probably haven't been trained to coach. And if I'm to be really cynical, they have two metrics, one of which is the number of people in coaching, and the other is price, which isn't very helpful.
Looks like we've lost Myles' audio here for a moment. Myles, can you adjust your headset? Hello, Myles. And while we're waiting for Myles to come on, there's a lot of material just that he's covered in this required reinvention. So I suggest that you put some questions and comments in the question area, and we'll have a look at those now. So Myles, can you adjust your headset so we can hear you? No, people are saying that they can't hear you, Myles, and that's true. You are no longer being picked up. So if you can adjust your headset, that would be great. So we cannot hear you. And we have one of our other presenters actually making a comment, and that's Eileen Gibbs. And yes, we're also very excited to see where he's going to go with this. It is actually quite a great presentation. And people are asking if we're going to get the outline and the slides. Yes, we're going to give you the outline and the slides. Myles, what I'm going to do is just going to do a little adjustment in here.
Their need to commoditize, their need to get people to comply, because it's not the person who we're coaching that's paying us, it's the person who's in charge of the coaching program, so we follow their bidding. You know, if I think about my coaching and the coaching that has been less successful and less enjoyable, one of the things that marks the less successful and less enjoyable is that I've been working with people who I've been asked to help fit, essentially, that they should fit better in the organization in which they work. And to the point where one person actually set it up, the coaching program, as a laboratory to see if they could learn the skills to be in a large organization. And they did that for about 9 months and then left and became an entrepreneur. But I was complicit in that. So all of that says to me that we might need to do something different. Let me move you on. The world of work in the 21st century. So of course the you know, a 20th to 21st century distinction is completely arbitrary, because time doesn't know that we've put centuries, years and days on it. It just kind of flows by. But there are some things, there is a shift occurring. Not just, I'm not arguing that, many people would argue that. And I've underlined process, which is to say that it's happening and we don't quite know what it is, but it's not complete yet. And here are some of the things that mark it. At the end of the 20th century, well, kind of post-war, you know, with Henry Ford and his line management, and then you get into total quality, then you get into business process re-engineering, then you get into Six Sigma, that whole drive for efficiency has had huge collateral damage, you could say, in as much as that those processes, Six Sigma, business process re-engineering, lean technologies, are really useful when it comes to a manufacturing process and various other processes. The problem is that we've applied them to human beings. Good for inanimate objects, not good for human beings. So you end up with an education system, for instance, that's entirely about having people to jump through hoops. And you end up with a talent management program or a development program which is based around competencies. And you know, self-expression and being competent doesn't quite match. So we need to think differently about how we develop people manage and develop people in our organizations, because we've been tainted by the drive for efficiency. And again, this is another part of the shift, which is the command and control and the shift to empowerment. I was listening to the radio the other day, and the commentator said, talking about society, that in our societies, the people at the top want control, and the way they said that was society is like a log pile. Those at the top want stability. So the idea that if the people at the bottom were empowered, were mobile, that's not really very helpful, because you know, well, your imagination can do the rest of that one. And even that word empowerment is a 20th century word, and I think enablement might be better, not least because it's positive, proactive, it's something to do, whereas empowerment, you know, it's saying, yes, you can do, it's giving permission. Enablement is actually being at the edge of helping, supporting, causing something to happen. We've got Generation Z, the millennium generation, some would call it, or the kind of the digital natives. They provide a different set of that group of people, their need for autonomy, for meaning and purpose is much stronger, so they're much less likely to comply. They don't respond to authority in the way that I was trained, literally, to do. So they provide an interesting challenge for people in the world of work. They simply don't understand why somebody would tell them how to do something when they're used to Googling it and doing the online thing and finding out for themselves or from a peer. So it's a wholly different way of thinking about how you show up at work. A very obvious, massive change in the way we work around technology, and many of the distance learning technologies are still in their infancy. The people who are responsible for those in organizations are happy if 23% of people sign up and use some of those things. So we haven't, people in the world of work use modern technology all the time. We, the providers of coaching and training, simply haven't caught up with it, and it changes the way people think and do work. Organizations have responded to those shifts in a number of ways. The bright have looked at more flexible structures based around people and relationships that people have. So a friend of mine had a conversation with his son, and his son was looking at who works for a large gaming organization, the son. He looked at who were the people who were most influential in what he did and what he thought and what he produced and created. And of the 20 people they mapped, only 2 of them were actually within the organization for which he worked, which kind of is worrying in a 20th century paradigm of command and control and kind of ancient notions of intellectual property. But it tells you that the structures we've created are too rigid. And other organizations, interestingly, have seen the change, and what they're doing is they're in complete denial, and they're simply digging their heels in and doing more under control. So, interesting place in which to play. What are the demands that that places on leaders and managers? Well, we know that engagement is key, and that the people are actively disengaged in vast numbers from the place of work in UK, Europe, and in the States. We've got serious problems with finding the next generations of leaders in many organizations, and our talent management processes don't help. I'll come back to the word genius later, because I think that might even be a more helpful way of thinking it. It individualizes it, which is, I think, the way you have to go. The world is more complex. Dealing with well, the next point makes it issues with no known solution, for instance. So it's not just about workload. It's about varieties of different projects that people have, and issues with no known solution within that. So as you move from a 20th to a 21st century, as you deal with Generation Z, as you deal with the speed of organizations, these place huge demands on people. And the amount of people I know who work 12-hour days is just absurd, unsustainable, but they're doing it. Here's another shift. The ratio of the manager to direct reports. In the kind of 80s and 90s, the ratio was 1 to 8, the average ratio of 1 manager to 8 direct reports. When you get into the middle of the, kind of around 2008, 2010, you find that that's gone to 1 to 14. So some of that's driven, that comes out of looking for flatter structures, but boy, does it put a pressure on the manager, and does it mean that it means that the direct report has less face time with the manager. We've mentioned Generation Z, but the problem with leaders and managers today is if command and control doesn't work, what then do I do? And then you've got that whole, distractions, multitasking, emails, mobile phones, open plan offices where people interrupt all the time. So you have to be significantly senior in most organizations now to have any kind of office space you can use. And there's also, we made a virtue of multitasking and kind of complimented people for their capacity to do it, but there's a huge diminution of focus and therefore performance in that world. So learning, I'm with an organization at the moment, and the chief executive is trying to make sure that his senior people don't turn on their email until 12 o'clock in the day, so that they actually get some quality thinking time. So that, all of that, that helping people think through their response to these kinds of issues is a rich playground for people with coaching skills. But because we've been speaking so much about issues of learning and development and not the real issues that face people on a day-to-day basis, most managers, leaders who have coaching don't see that their coach can help them with some of these issues. So I've had people sitting in a meeting saying, well, I've got to think through my strategy, and kind of said, all right, okay, so do you want to do that here? And they kind of look at you blankly and say, with you? Well, yes, why not? So the image of the coach is not of that as somebody you can help with real business issues. So I think there's an opportunity there. And that implicit in that, I think there's an opportunity in bringing back a performance bias. In my own marketing of myself as a coach, I'm trying to effectively get rid of the people that I work less well with. So I don't like doing things that are solely focused on learning and development. So I call my coaching meeting the challenge. So I'm trying to get to work only with people who've got significant business challenges in front of them. And then, of course, you say, in order for you to meet that challenge, what do you need to learn or what do you need to develop? So I'm not arguing it's a bias towards performance. I'm not arguing for throwing the learning and development agenda out. And actually, here's the thing. If the learning and development agenda is what you're brilliant as a coach, stay there. Because that's where you're brilliant. Enabling individual genius. When I started in coaching in the 80s, the motivation for the people that I was with, the people around me and myself, was about how do you help individuals flourish, self-express, thrive. And we lost that as we got hooked into the corporate agenda. And I think part of this, in a world where people have a greater sense of autonomy, increasingly younger people do, then this is a significantly interesting place to play, that having people in the world of work show up as genius. And that may mean that they have to move out of the organization they're working for. That's called a consequence. It's not a reason for not doing it. We don't use technology. Most coaches are a certain age. They're very often almost exclusively people who are in a second or sometimes a third career. They didn't grow up with technology. There's in the introduction you mentioned an e-coaching system that I've created, and I'm not trying to sell that, by the way, here. But as an example, it really is a system that somebody can sign into, and the system performs a lot of the same function as a coach. It helps you do the thinking. I've been speaking recently with a guy who has a system called Coach Track, which provides everything from tracking of meetings to tracking of results to provision of relevant materials in a very, very easily managed system. So technology can be used. So when people talk about e-technology, they're merely e-coaching. They're merely talking about shifting some of their activities to email or phone. That's not what I mean by that. I mean how do you use technology at what it's best at to support your coaching? For instance, the e-coach system that we've created could allow somebody, the first client, to use it. They were using one internal coach to 10 people, and as a result of having the e-coach take up some of the coaching, they got to working with one coach to 50 people. Now, if you begin to think of that economically, you drive down the cost of your coaching magnificently. You don't increase the amount of hours you're working. but you've got 50 people out there who are paying you much more than you would the 10. So there's technology has lots to offer us in this environment. And here's another thing: all of this is you're only as like in any sport, you're only as good as your last match. Get really good at coaching. Because I teach and train people to coach, I've probably spent more hours than maybe even anybody else in the world where my coaching has been observed and commented on and questioned by others. So I'm kind of getting relatively good at it. But the pros practice was, I used to play tennis to quite a high level. I spent hours hitting tennis balls on tennis courts, many more hours practicing than I did in the heat of battle. And that was fundamental to being good in the heat of battle. So find ways to practice, groups of 3 getting feedback, and that because I think we just left that for the beginners. No, pros practice every day. They practice more. Okay, enough said, Myles. So there's an opportunity for us in there. I'm going to take a break after this next slide and just see where everybody's at. Working with leaders and managers, for me, and I think it's something worth thinking about. It's about performance. So here's an example. One of the large retail, it's a global bank headquartered in the UK. I'm part of a panel. I was part of a panel. I stood down because the panel wasn't making any difference in the coaching it did. But some while back I was asked to coach a particular person. I sat down with them. It was a little bit difficult at first, and when I asked what they wanted to be coached on, they said, well, I've been told I'm a little bit of a bully. And actually my instant response to that was, are you? And the shock and horror on this person's face that was just extraordinary. It was very clear that was an appalling idea, and that they actually fundamentally weren't a bully. I did check that out later by doing a survey. But so he was showing up. He didn't think he was a bully. He wasn't sure why he was with this coach to work on some developmental issue. So after about 15 minutes, I said, tell me about your job. And so he started describing it in kind of job description terms. I said, no, what are you doing? What are you trying to achieve? The guy lit up. And after a while I said, so hold on, is that, do you know how to do this? Have you done this before? Is this easy? He said, no, this is incredibly complex. I've never dealt with anything this difficult before. So I said, if the coaching was to help you do that, would that be valuable? And another shift in the conversation. So that's what I ended up doing. The bullying issue was secondary. He had never really been trained as a manager, and he didn't have enough time to attend to his people. So we got around to talking about that. Performance, and particularly with those leaders who had a coach when they got promoted 10 years ago and then didn't really know why they had a coach, getting onto the performance agenda is how we help those people most. We need to break out of the box. I said earlier we've commoditized it. We've borrowed from the world of psychology. There's a given format. We meet for an hour or an hour and a half or whatever it is once a month. The approach is established, predominantly non-directive. We'll use Myers-Briggs. It'll be built around the competencies of the organization, the values of the organization, and we'll do it in your office. I sat down with the incoming chief executive of an organization where the 3 very charismatic founders have stood down, and they've sold the company to a very, very large global brand name. He'd had coaching before. We had a conversation, and it was clear that we wanted to work together. And so I said, so do you have any sense of how we're going to do this? What's it going to look like? Because I said, frankly, I've no idea. And it was interesting. He was inspired by the thought that I wasn't going to say, this is how I do coaching. He started off saying, no, once a month or once every 2 weeks isn't going to help, because I don't know, a lot of this is unplanned stuff that I'm dealing with, and I need a thinking partner. So we identified that there were 3 issues that he needed to talk about very quickly, and we put in the diary the next 3 conversations, and we made it available for him to speak to me informally, and we built that into the cost of the engagement. And then what I said was, Okay, and at the end of those three conversations, let's see what the next phase is. And the next phase has involved working on some stuff that emerged in the first phase, which are longer term, but we're simply being appropriate to his needs, and we're doing most of the meetings off-site, because the time that he spends getting from his office to where I am is time where he's decompressing and beginning to think. It adds immense value to the conversation, the coaching conversation. And the final bit on this is that I think we've got to learn to be better consultants. We've got to learn how to help people by understanding their business. And there isn't enough of that around. And that may mean building expertise in one or two different kinds of businesses so that you're more quickly able to understand. A senior person in a large organization does not want to have to educate you on the nature of their business and on the particular dynamics of their specific business. So any coaching engagement I get has built into it a consulting process, for which, of course, the client pays. Use technology. There's a wonderful piece of technology that somebody showed me the other day called StratPad. It's a very simple device that helps people plan strategy. So it's kind of almost like a self-coaching device. And that way you can make yourself more available at the right time to the people who need your help. Okay, I'm going to stop here. And I'm missing a slide. And just check just to see, having gone through that bit about working with leaders and managers, some things about the opportunity. Any questions?
Yes, Myles, we definitely have questions, but the very first question is actually, because your audio cut out for a moment, when you were talking about required reinvention, there were two points after poor buying, which was coaching commoditize and coaches selling out. So can you just briefly refer to those 2 points again, the coaching commoditize and coaches selling out, because people miss that.
Yeah. Okay. So being turned into a commodity, something that's easier to manage. If what it means in effect is the coaching has been to some degree pigeonholed. In other words, it's about learning and development and not about the whole myriad of other things that it could be about: performance, creativity, innovation, delivery of sales numbers, delivery of products, all of those things. It's about learning and development. Formats have been standardized. If you reach a certain level in the organization, you get a promotion, you move up the next level, you're given a coach along with some little extra money and some extra status, and because you're at a certain level in the business, you're allowed 6 sessions of the next year, and it's built around Myers-Briggs and the organization's values, for instance. That frequently has absolutely nothing to do with the needs of the person, the end user who's receiving the coaching. Of course, from our perspective, as coaching gets commoditized, the euro sign, the pound sign, and the dollar sign, what that's saying is that it becomes easier to knock down our fees because we're talking about comparative offerings. We, the coaches, sold out. I spoke about how in a world of compliance, the coach has become, in my view, in many cases, the agent of compliance. So because quite rightly the person across the table you're coaching isn't paying the bill, but somebody in an HR role probably is, we've actually become the agents of the organization to too great a degree. And the point I was making there was that the number of people that I've coached who are who really should move on from the organization, but for a variety of reasons the organization wants to keep, or whatever else, they want to stay because of their pension, it's just it's too horrifying. So causing people, using the coaching to cause people to comply, not a good thing.
Thank you for that. And the next question is, why do you say that coaching is losing relevancy and credibility?
Thank you. So it's an inaccurate little bit of writing. It's the end users are seeing it as being less relevant, and they're seeing it as being less relevant because it's not talking to them about the issues that they face, the things that are on their desks, in their in-trays that come in through their doors and their emails. When it's so exclusively focused on learning and development, for most managers, that's kind of a nice to do, not a must to do.
I see. And you also mentioned poor coaching, and the question is, does this refer to non-accredited trained coaches?
No, this refers to people who think they're qualified.
Okay.
And I'll be more specific about what I mean by that. There is a so this is a very simplistic, but it provides maybe a little insight into what I'm talking about. Lots of the world of the buyers of coaching have gotten hold of the idea that coaching should be essentially non-directive for the most part. There are some things around that. Also, some people think you need to have a degree in psychology, but that's a slightly different matter. But and how that gets heard by many people is, oh, I'm supposed to ask questions. And there's a vast difference between asking a question to which you already know the answer, a leading question, and a question that follows the interests of the person who's being coached. I don't know many schools of coaching that are capable of training managers in the non-directive skills. They all stop short. So, and they're all therefore reliant on the coach's ability to come up with a clever question or a clever observation. And this isn't just me speaking from, I train people, supervise people, speak at conferences, demonstrate all over the world. And the comment that comes back frequently is kind of shock at the degree to which the person made progress without prompting from me. So my view is that and what I get back from end users is is that the quality of what they get is not all it might be.
And this is related. The question is, what is the difference and the interplay of directive and non-directive coaching?
That's a delicious question, and with your permission, I'll come back to that later because I'd like to spend 5 minutes on it.
Okay, we'll table that one for the end. And then
I'll come back to it during the presentation.
Okay, excellent. And the last question we'll ask right now before we continue is, the largest companies in technology are moving back from flexibility and are now doing more assessment, accountability, and control. And they are reporting better results. Do we as coaches need to be adaptable to be effective for the wide range of business and management models?
Yes, absolutely. And the danger here is that, which is back into some of the things I've been saying, is that that it's kind of, Martin Luther once said that humanity is like a drunken peasant on a horse, always ready to fall off on one side or the other. So one side might be control, and the other side might be empowerment. Empowerment actually became laissez-faire, no rules. That was dangerous. That's too much to the extreme. And then too much control completely stifles any form of creativity, innovation. But more than that, kills the desire to come to work, so kills productivity. So yes, we need to be sensitive to the needs of the businesses. So for instance, if you're working with SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, the demand there is often for greater expertise because it's a small business and I don't have the wealth of resources around me to get other kinds of solutions. Whereas if you're in a bigger organization, the non-directive piece tends to fit better because they have other kinds of training and resources available to them. here's my fear is that as those, frequently what were small IT companies get big, they start putting in management processes. What we've got to do, what we must collectively make sure doesn't happen, is that we don't use those processes of assessment and compliance to strangle human beings. We use them for the bits that they're good at, the inanimate things, managing the process, keeping the statistics, not around the people. And that would be the danger.
Very good. Okay, so I will save the rest of the questions as we go on.
Great. So the last slide I went through was about working with leaders and managers. And here's also a thing that plays into this whole thing about control and empowerment, control and enablement. I frequently find that managers are very confused about how so this is an extension of working with managers. This is something managers don't generally know. They don't know how to balance control and empowerment, control and enablement. And so what they go back to is their own disposition. If I'm a little bit of a control freak, I do control. If I'm a little bit of a kind of hands-off person who doesn't like confrontation, I love coaching because it means that I can back off. And actually, like any of these things, it's about an appropriate level of control with an appropriate level of empowerment and enablement. And the understanding here is that this is a depiction of the manager's role as it relates to their direct reports. That a part of that is about leadership. And in the context, leadership can be used in so many different ways. In the context of the relationship between a manager to the managed, to the direct report, leadership, I'll come back to, I'll say it means a specific thing. Management is another element of the role, and coaching is the third. So leadership is about why somebody might engage in a task or set a goal or deliver on a project. It's from the perspective of the organization. Why is about the context, the strategy, the mission and the goals of the organization. So if what I'm doing is aligned with the purpose of the organization, that's a great thing. The manager can help me understand that. Equally, why is about my personal motivation. With a manager who's aware of their role as a manager and their need to attend to my growth and development, then if we choose activities and goals that are aligned with what motivates and interests and excites me, that's clearly a good thing. The management piece is about what somebody does. It's defining their role, defining the goals and the success measures, and the kind of the practice that goes around it. The standards is the word I was looking for. And coaching is about how. So if you take just the two bottom circles there, the management and the coaching, that when I'm managing, I'm actually taking care of the organization's interests. I'm making sure that what the direct report does adds up, aligns with the organization's needs. When I'm coaching, I'm now talking about how somebody does it. It has to be congruent with the way in which that person thinks and acts and behaves. So management is directive in this model, and coaching is essentially non-directive. And that's how you get a balance between control, the management piece, with the enablement, the coaching piece. And when managers, there's a brilliant chapter in my book on effective coaching that goes through that in much more detail and explains it more clearly. But when managers get their head around that, it gives them clarity about in which circle do they need to be in any given moment. And clearly, in a specific conversation, you might move from managing to coaching. So you could be having a performance management conversation with somebody and making it very clear what's required of them. That will be in the management circle. And then once that's clear and agreed, then you say, so how are you going to go about delivering that? And that becomes the coaching conversation. And it's that balance that's important. Clearly, I'm a devotee of the coaching approach, but I also know that most people do not, in organizations, do not have clarity, sufficient clarity about their role and the expectations, their goals. And if that's not there, it's a bit like playing chess without having clearly delineated squares, and without having clarity about what the end game is, and without having clarity about how the pieces move. If the goal isn't clear, if what isn't clear, there is no game and you can't succeed. That whole thing then is based on, for that to work, for you to be able to shift from management to coaching to leadership, you've got to have a good relationship. If you want to coach somebody and you're their manager, for them to open up, they've got to trust you. So it's a relationship built in trust. It's worth saying that most managers won't go, when they're coaching, won't go into the depth that a personal coach would go into. It tends to be more pragmatically, practically focused, task-related, job-related, tends to be, which is a safeguard for the individual being coached. So I wanted to put that out there because I think that it's so fundamental to how we can help managers, kind of understand what they're about, given that a big part of it is about their management of other people. So for some reason in my pack, I've lost the intervening slides that reminds you of the story we're on. I've tried to present a story that says coaching is in a difficult state, losing some credibility in mature markets. There's an opening in the emerging markets, which is fascinating to look at. The world of work is changing, which puts different demands on leaders and coaches, which presents us coaches with an opportunity. And then talking then specifically about how you, in this new world, help managers. And that's where that last slide got to. But I want to move on, and I want to talk about the craft of coaching. And I kind of like the word craft, by the way. There's a wonderful book by a guy called Dennett called Craftsmanship, which is worth reading. It's quite inspiring in terms of understanding how to be excellent in what you do. So here's a point of view. I happen to believe it's correct, but I'm certain that there are people out there who might not buy it. And in my previous business, the School of Coaching, when I work with people to train, this is the core notion that I'm trying to get across. So first of all, that word directive, to instruct, to tell, to impose, and the word non-directive. I don't like the word non-directive. It's not a great instructional or educational title because it doesn't tell people what to do. It tells people what not to do. Don't direct. And that's one of the big problems with the quality of coaching, which is that we haven't shown people what they can do in that space. So here's a quick insight into what I believe you do in the non-directive space. So you can coach from a number of different places. You can coach from following interests. This is, you notice that on the page that I haven't lined that up directly with non-directive, because the truth is, as far as I know, it's impossible to be completely non-directive. If I find what my coachee says, my player says, to be inspiring, I'm probably going to smile. If I'm worried about what they're going to do, I'm probably, my body posture, my facial expression may well change. It will leak out one way or the other. They will get a sense of whether I am sitting in approval or disapproval of what they're doing. So as far as I know, it's impossible to be totally non-directive. Following interest is the closest I know how to get. And I'll describe that in greater detail. So slightly more directive is you can coach from structure. Structure is, say somebody says something like, well, last year was the most awful business year of my life. It kind of begs the question, how do you want this year to be, or how do you want next year to be? And because what's implicit in that is a structure called past, present, future. There's another structure, good, bad. So if somebody describes something in terms of bad, it begs the question, what's good? But it's not following interest. You know that structure, and you've asked the question based on your understanding of that structure. There are more complex structure. In Inner Game, Tim Galway, he has a structure that says that performance, learning, and enjoyment need to be present in any activity for there to be a high level of performance. So if somebody's just talking about performance as a coach, I might ask them, so what are you learning? Or I might ask them, so how, in what way are you enjoying this? So that's coaching from structure. Coaching, next level up, coaching from process. I sometimes do use a guided visualization to help people be more creative, say, or to get a greater depth of insight. So a process is a set of instructions or questions that I give somebody that are linked and lead them from A to B. So I'm consciously and generously, I hope, and with permission, leading them from A to B, but I'm more in control. And finally, I can coach from knowing. So this is, our more traditional models come from coaching from knowledge. That's where it starts from. Coach knows, you don't, listen up. So in my model of coaching, I could overlay a triangle on this and say that kind of 80% of effective coaching tends to be of the nature of following interest. And the reason for that is it's that fully enables the individual you're being coached, that's being coached. It's that actually causes them to invest and believe in their own autonomy and their own sense of authority. And I think that's a desired outcome from effective coaching, that people should be more powerful and more independent than when they started. The trouble with coaching from structure, process, or knowing is that you can create a dependency. So what I'm trying to do is that at the School of Coaching, we would train people and forbid them to do any of the other kinds of things, structure, process, or knowing, until they had mastered the following interest process. And then we'd let them loose. If we let them loose before that, they will always revert in difficult situations to telling. But if we make sure that if they're not allowed to do that, then they've got a different place to revert to. So here's what following interest looks like. This is sometimes called the Model T. And the horizontal bar says expand. So if I'm talking with somebody about how they might approach a given situation, and I said, what might you do? And they described a possibility, then my next question is not, oh, and what would the consequences be, or and what's your next step? My response is, that's very interesting. What else could you do? And then after they've answered, what else could you do? So the first, in following interest, you want to generate as many possibilities or as many perspectives on a situation before you then say, okay, which of those is most interesting? And what you've done there is, because you're not making the choice, if there are 4 different options and you say which is most interesting, they're doing the thinking, they're making the choice. You're following their interest. And it's a very simple skill, and most people don't do it. And the real joy of it is, if that's the fundamental part of coaching, if the 2 questions are, what do you notice and what else, followed by what's most interesting, I'm never sitting in a coaching conversation wondering about what the next question is, because it's what else, or what's most interesting. And that actually, all that part of your brain that was previously trying to be clever and think of the next question is now freed up to really attend to the person on the other side of the desk and to pick up those more subtle signals that tell you how they're thinking, how they're responding, all of those things. And that's one of the ways into being genius at coaching. So expand, tell me what you notice, what else, that gets more up there. Focus, tell me what's most interesting or what stands out. And here's a little subtlety within the whole thing. There's kind of closer to the center of my T, there's what's known to the person being coached. And then a little further out from that is what could be known. So it's when you say, tell me something you couldn't do about this situation. or it's when you stretch their capacity to imagine or think or to embrace. And then beyond that, it's what's known to you that they could know. So that you can, so clearly here that's a directive act. It's possible to do that within the context of the Model T. But that's the core. I don't know many people who are skillful in that. And there's a great loss in that. And it's so unbelievably simple. So I wanted to put that out there as a fundamental skill in the whole game of being an effective coach. I'm going into a slightly different place with the next set of slides. I want to talk to you about enabling genius. But before I go there, because it's a slightly different feeling, texture. Sherry, I'm wondering if there's any questions that come up in relation to the last bit.
Yeah, there's actually a couple, but first I just want to say that several people said the manager role with the 3 intersecting circles, that was excellent. It really gave them a great understanding, so thank you for sharing that. Another person actually was asking about your book, if it is going to be coming out in a digital format so they can read it on their iPad.
Yes, and not immediately. The current publishers are not going to re-edit or republish because they've got a different business focus. So that means that I'm in the process of getting back the rights to the book, and the first thing I will do is set it up so that it's available digitally.
Excellent.
Not least because that's easy.
Somebody actually asked, this is having to do with culture, could it be that American business culture is extremely profit-oriented and that's why some of these other areas are not being attended to?
I find I'm not qualified to answer that question. And I've worked in the U.S. and I've worked in Europe and I've worked in Asia and I've worked for global companies in those places. It's an interesting question.
Well, we can come back to that. We can think about it and we can answer the questions either in the member portal or on the Facebook wall.
Yeah, and the person who asked the question, if you wanted to add a little bit more depth to your question, that may open it up for me. I have to say, I haven't seen a stronger profit drive across those different geographies. But that may be because I tend to work for global companies.
Right, that's a good point. And our last question before we continue is, Myles, you mentioned earlier about a coach knowing and understanding the nature of a business and that you suggest building in a consultative approach. The question is, until what point must the coach understand the client's business?
Yes, because it's a great question, and again, I'm slightly struggling for an answer. I know what I'm trying to achieve by doing it. So I'm trying to do a number of things. I'm trying to make sure that when I'm sitting in front of the person being coached, that I have a counterpoint to what they're saying. In other words, if I'm only attending to them and their view of their world and their business, I'm going to be caught up in all the bits that they're not seeing and not understanding and don't want to see and understand. So I've got to have a counterpoint. So one, I've got to know enough to be able to verify, in a sense, or notice the congruency of what they're saying. Two, I have to be able to participate with that person at the level of their understanding of the business. So if I'm working with the chief executive, then my consulting process will be very much about the strategy of the business. Whereas if I'm working further down an organization, it'll be more goal related. It will be more related to the kind of dynamics of the team. It'll probably be slightly more developmental than if I'm working for a chief executive. So some of the variables are around at what level in the organization you're working for. What I'm trying to do is be that counterpoint, so I'm in a place to challenge where I need to. What I'm trying to do is make sure that I don't waste time with the chief executive on understanding getting an education about his or her business, so that we can get focused quite quickly. And what I'm trying to do is to make sure that I can have a robust and quick conversation about their business. So I need to understand not the fine details, but I need to understand how the big blocks move. And I tend to work in professional service firms, financial institutions, and then there are kind of one or two outliers to that. But I find that if I've spent time on being with somebody from the HR team who spent a couple of hours with me, with the person that I'm going to coach who spent a couple of hours with me, and then with probably about another 10 people, so anywhere between 5 and 10 people spending 2 days in that business, I've probably learned enough about that business to be able to be a useful sounding board and a thinking partner for a senior person.
Thank you very much for that, Myles, and as well
useful to also have some basic consulting models. If you don't already know it, check out these two. One of which is Ken Wilber's W-I-L-B-E-R, Wilber's 4 quadrants. It's a particular way of looking at an organization. Actually, now that I think of it, there's a chapter on that in Effective Coaching, my book as well. But he calls that the integral method, and it's a way of looking at organizations and organization life. And one that's been around for a very long time is the famous McKinsey 7S model, which talks, I won't remember all the 7 S's, but it talks about shared values, superordinate goals, strategy, systems, staff, etc. But it gives you some loci onto which to attach questions to make sure that you're making a fulsome inquiry about that business. And let me add one more thing. It's kind of against the nature of a coach, but an absolutely essential skill, I believe, for somebody who's coaching in an organization is the ability to generate a hypothesis. So when I've sat with a number of people, part of what my processing will be, I've heard all this data. What's my hypothesis about what's happening in this business? And then what that does is it drives greater focus to my consulting process, my process of inquiry. So it's a useful discipline.
Well, I totally agree with the people that are writing in that this is brilliant, top-notch material, super, and it is fantastic. I've made a lot of notes, and I appreciate our note takers who are here, who are scrambling to get all these notes organized as well for us. So now we'll let you continue with the rest of your presentation.
Thank you, Sherry. Oh boy. Here's a lot of words. I probably shouldn't have put this one up. Too many words. So genius refers to the innate ability in each and every individual, all the resources, skills, abilities, capacities that are part of being human. It's also a state, a way of being. The last word there is under the webinar control panel, so I can't read my own words. A condition of mind, a set of circumstances, rather than a genetic disposition or a God-given gift. So forgive me for those of you who have a religious persuasion. I don't mean to denigrate that by any manner or means. But we have classified genius as being simply something that was given to you through your parents, you inherited through your genes, or in some, a gift. He's a natural. She's just gifted, which explains away extraordinary performance. The thing about explaining away extraordinary performance is that it excuses us. there's significant evidence that says that yes, some part of your genetics will make you suitable for certain kinds of activities, will give you a certain disposition and a mental disposition and a certain behavior. So genetics are there and play a part, but only to a fraction of what we thought. And what's being learned right now, and I've got names of people that are worth chasing down later on in the presentation, is that actually we are far more mutable than we think. We can influence what we become. And although some of you will know about the idea that no excellence, no genius is achieved without the 10 years, the 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. So that's actually an average around quite a spray of other data. But there is this strong sense that deliberate practice is a very significant contribution to genius. So people talk about then, well, hold on a minute, Myles, what about child prodigies? What about Mozart playing music at the age of 5, creating symphonies? The symphonies that he created at the age of 5 were crap, frankly. Not that I'm a musician, but I'm reliably informed. That they were derivative, they were drawn from other things. It wasn't until he was kind of 17 and 18 that he started composing things that were any good. That's your 10,000 hours. He was born, Mozart, into a family where there was music all around him, even from before birth, where his father was the director, the assistant director at a seminary, and his father invented a method of tuition that was the precursor to Suzuki. So vastly enlightened way of teaching. He had an elder sister who, when he was staggering around the place in nappies, his elder sister was being trained on the piano and whatever else. So as soon as he could reach the piano, he was beginning to play. So he was, yes, there may be something in the genes, but there was also just deliberate practice. So what this is about taking away the idea that genius is the preserve of the few, and actually challenging us and saying that if we attend to it, we can achieve extraordinary performance ourselves. The last little bit, just language interests me. Genitum means to beget, which in turn means to cause or produce. So you can't be a genius if you're sitting in your ivory tower scratching your head. It is about being out there and delivering results. And for somebody, the nature of my coaching is performance related. I'm interested in results. So in a comparative world, there are only a small number of geniuses. In a different way of looking at the world, the word genius, that says that David Schenck wrote a book called The Genius in All of Us. And that's where I'm coming from. So I'm reinventing the word genius to refer to excellence, potential, giftedness that's available to us all. And something's happened. I can't move to my next slide. There we go. So here's some maxims, and I've called them maxims in the making because this is a work in progress. And what it says is there's genius in all of us, and that what's linked to that is each person's genius is individual and unique, and that you can move towards genius in a given craft or discipline. So I'll stop right there and say that so. As coaches who are interested in having people self-express, flourish, be all they can be, that helping them identify the activity, their unique craft, is part of that process. There's another piece of research that I've seen recently which says that actually, my third point there, you can move towards genius in a given craft or discipline, actually learning other and becoming kind of maybe not to quite the same level of excellence in other disciplines feeds the first discipline. So many people who are genius in one discipline you'll find are really good at music or whatever else it is they're really good at, because they feed. As I said earlier, I used to be a good tennis player. I'm now 53. I'm planning on playing competitive tennis in 2 years' time, 55 and over. So I've got my coach, I'm getting fit again, and I'm learning stuff. What's really interesting is the stuff that I'm learning on the coach, on the tennis court about how to win, particularly, has huge implications for me as a businessman and an entrepreneur. So there's a whole load of stuff in here that we can help people with. Then so you may have genius in a particular craft, but if in a particular activity in any minute, if you can get into flow, what Tim Galway calls self-2, you will give your best performance in that minute. And getting into flow is a skill. If you haven't bumped into it, reading Tim Galway's Inner Game of Tennis, which isn't about tennis really, is a wonderful place to start. The other thing in this is that learning is key. That's the deliberate practice piece. And I've been through this, prose practice. I visited a local tennis club recently where I was delivering a seminar, and I was watching some people who were playing tennis, and what was really clear was, one, they were kind of having fun, although they were getting kind of cross as well when they missed. What was really clear was that nobody had learned anything new about tennis in at least 15 years. And whereas it's absolutely acceptable to go out and do something just for the fun of it, of course, it was kind of tragic because there was this wonderful opportunity to learn and to get more from the activity. So what I notice is that people who are, Federer lost in that match 2 years ago, was it, to Djokovic in the final of the US Open, was slightly shocked. He went away and he reinvented his game in about 2 or 3 different departments. He added in a little bit more power on the backhand. He added in a drop shot. The guys who are great learn. With permission, you can enable evoke genius. In other words, you can't impose it upon them. That's where genius gets dangerous. That's where you have young kids being made to play a sport and being shouted at by their parents from the sideline. When true community can only occur through autonomy. So I'm actually thinking about, if an individual can demonstrate genius, then groups can too. But we are slightly trapped in notions of team players being people who conform. Dependency gives way to independence that ultimately gives way to interdependence. But you can't get to interdependence from dependence. You have to go through independence first. So if I'm dependent and trying to be part of a team, I'm not going to speak up. I'm not going to express my point of view. I'm going to subvert. I'm going to keep quiet. The last point is contextual. We've been through it. Fulfillment means and prosperity mean different things to people in the 21st century. That's about meaning, purpose, autonomy. So
let me jump in for a moment here.
I'll talk. Yeah.
Because we are actually coming to the end of our time, and I don't know if you are interested in continuing, but can I have a show of hands? Put your hand up if you are interested in hearing Myles go on for maybe another 15 or 20 minutes. Otherwise, we'll just take our final questions and wrap up. Okay, looks like most people are quite interested in you. So if you wouldn't mind continuing for a bit longer, Myles, then we can keep going.
And I will accelerate.
Okay, very good.
Because I want to get to the bit where there's 1 or 2 bits in here that are become more practical.
Okay, very good.
So here's a sheet. You can go through this before. This is a way that I've created in the UK an Enabling Genius research project. There is so much information about what it takes to be excellent out there that nobody's pulling together in a way that's communicable, and nobody's the last column on this on the right hand side, the tools and techniques. So that's an ongoing project, and I'll probably work with Ben about some way of Ben Croft and to get this out into the world for people to see it. So you can see my maxims, you can see research, names against that. David Schwenk, Carol Dweck has a brilliant book on mindset. So there are names in there and in the relevant research that is so you can get to this, and it's a really. I'm going to move on from that. There's too much information for the time here, but you'll find that for yourselves. Great stuff to read. Here's the point. I think you could go out onto the street and you could stop everybody, and you could say to them, tell me 3 things you could do to either be more productive, to learn more, or to be happy more happy. Sorry, bad English. And I think people would come up with answers. And I think that's interesting. Here's a very simple technique that comes out of that notion of being the best you can be and exhibiting your genius. That requires no effort. In this little, there are 4 grids here. So there are 4 grids because 4 fitted neatly on a page. So you only need 1 grid. And in the column under quality, you might you'd fill in some quality that's relevant to you. So right now, on my notebook where I track what I'm doing, I've got a little grid like this. And in the quality section, I've got leadership, productivity, and joy as 3 qualities that I want to manifest day to day. And AM is morning, and PM is afternoon. And simply 4 times a day, I rate myself on a scale of 1 to 10 against those qualities. And here's what's amazing. It changes. In the business that I sold, the School of Coaching, in my last year before I moved on, I didn't have a formal position in the kind of the matrix, the organizational chart. And I found it very difficult to influence, and decided that the nature of my influencing should be through leadership. And I remember going into the office one day, and about 5 minutes before I got there, I asked myself on a scale of 1 to 10, what was my experience in me of leadership right now? And the answer was about 4 on a scale of 1 to 10. I hit the door of the office, I asked myself again, and the number had gone up to 5 or 6. I met the receptionist on the ground floor. She smiled at me, I smiled back, and she said, we haven't seen you for a long time. And I said, oh no, I've been traveling and I was with this client and we did that. She said, I had no idea you guys did that kind of work. I got upstairs, I had an almost similar conversation with the receptionist in our own office. And then to get to my desk, there's a corridor, one option, or I can go through the main open plan office. I found myself walking through the main open plan office. I normally go the other way because I'm shy and retiring. And somebody said, Myles, I'm dealing with this client and there's this issue. What do you think? And suddenly I stopped. I'd had 3 conversations that on any other day I would not have had, simply by becoming more aware of a quality. So Galway, Tim Galway, Inner Game, from whom I've learned a lot, his words are, awareness is curative. So here's a great technique for yourself and for people you work with that can cause a change in behavior very, very swiftly. That was kind of a gratuitous gift. I want to talk about you as a coach as we bring this to a close. What's your identity as a coach? In fact, my tennis coach asked me this the other day. He said, what's my signature? I didn't understand what he meant. He said, well, what's the unique way in which you play tennis? I'd never worked that out. When I worked that out, I could practice it. So understanding what I'm great at when I coach is a really key part of being a good coach and becoming a better coach. It also means that I'm better able to choose the kind of work that I do. Your craft. So given your identity, what specifically is your craft? Prose practice. What's your niche? Is it particular kinds of people in particular moments of their career? Is it particular kinds of topics or agendas that you like working against, or is it particular kinds of industry? Don't be afraid to stop focusing on the places where you're less interested. You'll make greater inroads and add greater value and market more effectively in the places where you've got a story to tell. So, whoops, that's not what I wanted. Okay. I'm going to give you an exercise on the next page. I've kind of gone back a step so that you don't see the words. This is a process that's designed to help people understand who they are as a coach, what their genius is as a coach. And it's set up as a set of questions so that it can be done in pairs. Let me just take you through it very quickly. So you could imagine asking a friend or colleague or fellow coach these questions. As you start this process, what's on your mind? That's about helping people get present. Anything you can do to make sure you're fully present, same thing. Let me remind you the context for these questions, so that's about focus. And then, what are you good at as a coach? What coaching-related activities bring you joy? What do people ask of you as a coach? What do people seek from you as a coach? What is it that drew you to coaching? If you could choose your engagements, what kind of engagements do you choose? Not included in this is a reflection on purpose, helping people understand their purpose. That comes before this, but it doesn't matter. From all these questions, what stands out? And then the next part of it is, so what I get people to do that in pairs, then I get them to stop, and then there's a visualization exercise, which is I get them to picture themselves when they were coaching with a degree of real excellence in a state of flow. And I get them to get a really strong mental image of that. And then I get them to get the image to disappear, to be replaced by a symbol of themselves as a great coach. So what I'm trying to do is get around the left side of the brain, the rational side of the brain, get to the creative side of the brain for where an image comes, simply to generate more creative input. So after the visualization exercise, they get back into their pair. What image or symbol occurred to you? How might you understand that? I get people to imagine after this perfect coaching session that their supervisor comes in the door and gives them feedback about their coaching, which is positive, and that becomes an affirmation. What stood out from you from the first part of the exercise? Then get a sense or feeling of having a clear purpose in life. What I'm trying to do is to put the person into flow in that moment. What does this feel like? They answer, and then they say, from that place or feeling, what does this exercise suggest is your unique ability or genius as a coach? So now, that's unbelievably useful to have an understanding of that because you can practice it. I want to say something else very swiftly about being a coach and your identity as a coach, because there's a dark side to that typically too. People often don't know why they ended up in coaching. I'm going to tell this story really quickly, so for obvious reasons. I, at the age of 5, had an elder sister, Hillary, who died of leukemia. When she was dying, she was in her sick room, and my memory of that was that I was not allowed into that room. So somewhere in my psyche, I got it wired up that if I don't know what's happening for somebody, they're going to die. That's really something to run around life with. Now, this is oversimplified, and the storytelling exaggerates it, but I think you get the point. So until I could get beyond that, my coaching was simply in service of myself. I was simply making sure that I didn't feel bad by having people die. That's why I was coaching. So I did a lot of work to see if I could actually, if I was so predisposed to being a coach that I could do nothing else and therefore was a danger to my clients, or whether I could get beyond it. So there's your uniqueness, your unique genius as a coach, but there's also that thing that will get in your way. Both are worth understanding. That's it. I think what I've tried to do in this presentation, so I think the thing I didn't say there is that exercise is really useful, because if you take the word coach out of it, you can use exactly the same process for people in different disciplines. Because I think part of what we need to do as coaches is get back to that place that inspired most of us, which is, what does it take for an individual to excel? And I think that's where we can, a lot of what this story that I've been telling centers around. I'm going to stop there, Sherry.
I have 3 questions that we'll ask, and then we will finish up. And this has really been quite fascinating. There's only a few slides that Myles did not go over, but you will get those in the slide deck that is in the member portal. And people are also asking if there's a recording in the slide. Yes, everything is put in the members portal, so that's where you'll get it. The first question is, what are the opportunities that are emerging for coaches now where they can make a real difference? So this must have to do with the 21st century.
Yes. There are a number of situations. My brain is functioning less effectively than I would like. We've got, I've mentioned Generation Z. People loosely put that around kind of the millennium. So those people would only be 13 by now. So actually the Generation Z, for our purposes, are people in their 20s. But there's also the kind of the tail on that, or the leading edge of the leading edge of it, which is there are people now entering management positions, roles in organizations who have an innate understanding or affinity, shall I say, towards the ideas of autonomy, of self-expression, because they weren't brought up in the kind of in the slightly stultifying conditions in which I was brought up, in which I was trained to comply. So they're more open to coaching. They're more, because it's about them, because they're not having stuff imposed on them, they're given a space to explore. So just in terms of you know, those are really interesting people to talk to, and they're really, really exciting people to work with. I'm working with the National Health Service in the UK, NHS. I'm working with two guys who are in their late-ish 30s, and they just the amount of ground they take is much more than most people I work with, because they have an understanding of their own authority, and they're great team leaders because they're not trying to get in other people's way. So that's one very clear place. I think there's other is looking for at organizations or parts of organizations that are struggling to change to match the 21st century. So you know, there are great exemplars of that shift. The Amazons and the Googles and Whole Foods and whatever else, who, because they put an attention on their end user and became more flexible and more rapid in their response to the end user, what they discovered was they couldn't treat the people in between the leadership and the end user as mere machines that were inflexible. They had to treat them with the same, to generate the same flexibility and responsiveness. They had to treat them as human beings. So organizations that are moving through that shift, that's a great place to start coaching people. And that's true for any moment of change. So my kind of marketing is driven by what organizations out there are going through significant change. They're the place to go and speak to people.
And you actually, the second question is, you actually partly answered it in the first question, and that is, what are the demands of leaders and managers? You mentioned earlier that people in the past, a manager had 8 reports, and now they have up to 14 with a flat type of organization. How do these leaders and managers need to perform now?
Most people get to work, and some people enjoy their work and they identify with their craft or their discipline. Some people have a professional skill. I'm a lawyer, I'm a consultant, I'm a doctor, whatever it is. And their work identity tends to be wrapped up in that. So when they get, and this is a gross exaggeration, but there's some truth to it clearly. So when they get promoted, what they see is more money and status, and actually they compete with each other, say, I'm managing more people than you are. That makes me better than you. And what they fail to see is actually you're now doing a completely different job. Your job is no longer, or is less about being a doctor or whatever it is, or a lawyer or a maker of widgets. Your job actually is, in vast part, to take care of and enable the people around you. And frankly, most managers don't see that, and many of them don't want to see it. So I think that that's another place where we can add extraordinary value. And I think that another place that because the world is moving so fast, and because structures are changing, many managers are dealing with issues for which there is no known answer. So you see, Harvard. We're working with a university that's setting up a business school in Africa, because what happens to people in Africa is they get sent to, if they're senior and heading towards the top, they get sent to Harvard. They learn some stuff in Harvard. They come back to Africa to take up their new management position, and they find that most of what they learned is completely irrelevant because the world has moved on and doesn't talk about what it's like on the ground out in Africa. Any business education of that nature will by its very nature and essence be at least 10 years out of date, because that's when the case studies were written. So where I think a coach has an extraordinary point of leverage is in helping people deal with the world as it is, which is where there are many places where there are unknown solutions. There isn't the manual to go to. You got to make it up.
I think that's excellent. And our last question actually ties right into that. And what is the best way as a coach to facilitate thinking and enable genius?
I take you back to, well, first of all, as I said earlier, if the game isn't clear, in my chessboard analogy, it's very difficult, because the conversation goes over. So I get really clear with the people I'm working with why we're working together. So in the very first conversation, I'm listening for what's the job we've got to do. And then the second thing I'm listening for is are we the people to do it? Because actually they can vote me out as the coach and I can vote them out as the client. I don't have to coach them. But so what I'm trying to do is say, okay, so this is what I'm here to help you with. And if there isn't something clear like that, it's very difficult to add value. So first of all, a clear game, a clear context. We're here to do this. If that isn't there, you'll end up having conversations that are driven by the fact that they had an argument with their boss the day before and they want to talk about that. Fine, I might spend 5 minutes on that, but if my coaching is to help them reinvent the risk management system for the retail division of a large bank, I'm going to spend 5 minutes on that and get them back focused on the risk management system. So context is all. And that's where the energy and excitement is. And then that idea of the Model T and following interest is absolutely the prime and core skill. That's the foundation. So, my first question will be, okay, so tell me what I need to know about this. And they'll look at me strangely, and I'll say the question again, and then they'll answer it. And then what else do I need to know? What else do I need? What else? And then as they play that bit out, I'll say, okay, so of all of those things you said, and I'll probably summarize, what do you need to focus on now? And the power of that in terms of moving them into flow in that moment, so getting them to be a genius coachee player in front of me is extraordinary. And that's what drives, that's a big part of what drives it. But the other is then, and I'm beginning to talk to people more about how they enable their genius. So if they're up for a conversation about what they're great at, we'll have that. And then we'll have a conversation about how they do more of it. In the last 6 months, I got really clear that what I'm good at is generating intellectual property. When I looked at my diary 3 or 4 weeks ago, I realized that I was doing lots of things other than generating intellectual property. So what I've done is, every Monday morning, I don't turn on my email, I don't turn on my mobile phone. I spend from 8:30 until 12:30 generating intellectual property, and I do that on Fridays as well. Now, I manage to do that 80% of the time. So I'm investing in, I'm feeding the thing that I'm great at, and I'll try and do that for the people that I work with.
Excellent.
So there are 3 things: context, what we're doing, that whole process of following interest, because that's what releases and enables people, and then focusing on what you're great at and making sure you do what you're great at. You practice what you're great at and you do what you're great at.
That is a great way to wrap this up. And since there's definitely more questions, please go to facebook.com/WBECS and add your comments, feedback, and ask more questions. And Myles can go there and respond to you there. And
I will do.
Thank you so much, Myles. And the slides and recording will be available in the member area along with the notes as soon as they become available. You can learn more about our wonderful presenter, Myles, by going to his individual web page just about him, which is wbecs.com/Myles Downey, and that's also on the Facebook page right now. And Myles, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share with us as we wrap up today?
Yeah, it's a strange one. I once asked Tim Galway whether he believed in synchronicity, and he said only when it happens. And webinars I find difficult because I don't get the feedback from the people sitting in front of me. But uniquely in this presentation, I felt, and I'm not kind of a spiritually inclined person, I'm very pragmatic. I have felt a huge sense of there being people with me. So I'm deeply grateful for that.
And people have certainly loved this presentation. They've been impressed, awed. They think it's tremendous, and so do I. And I thank you so much for being here today, and thank you to all of the people who are participating. Thanks for hanging on and asking all your questions. And yes. Thank you so much, and I will sign off now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.